The Sad Sager Saga. Catherine Sager was 9 years old when she and her father, pregnant mother, and 5 brothers and sisters set out on the Oregon Trail in the spring of 1844. Soon after starting, her mother gave birth to a baby girl. Then they got right back on the road. Catherine was expecting a tough journey, but she was surprised by her first major problem the family faced: seasickness. The motion of the wagon made us all sick, she remembered. It was weeks before we got used to the seasick motion. Once they got used to the bouncing, the Sager kids came up with travel games, like jumping in and out of the wagon while it was moving. It was lots of fun, until one day in August. When performing this feat that afternoon, my dress caught, and I was thrown under the wagon wheels, both of which passed over me, badly crushing the left leg before father could stop the oxen. Catherine Sager. Catherine's father leaped down and scooped up his daughter. "My dear child," he cried, "your leg is broken all to pieces." A doctor from another wagon put her leg in a cast. Then they got right back on the road. From then on, Catherine rode in the wagon or walked alongside on crutches. That shows you how slow the oxen were. She could keep up on crutches. Anyway, this turned out to be the good part of the trip. Catherine's father soon caught a fever, grew weaker, and died. He was buried along the trail. Less than a month later, her mother got sick. She had never fully recovered from a difficult childbirth. She died and was also buried by the trail. So in 26 days we became orphans, Catherine wrote. 7 children of us, the oldest 14 and the youngest a babe. Too far west to turn back, they had no choice but to get back in their wagon and continue on to Oregon. Other families on the trail helped the Sager children prepare food and take care of their baby sister. All 7 Sager kids made it to Oregon, where they were dropped off at the home of Narcissa and Marcus Whitman, the missionaries who had traveled to Oregon almost 10 years before. She spoke kindly to us as she came up, Catherine said of her first meeting with Narcissa Whitman, but like frightened things, we ran behind the cart, peeping shyly around at her. Whitman asked the boys why they were crying. They told her. "Poor boys, no wonder you weep," she said. The Whitmans took in all 7 Sagers. The children found Narcissa Whitman kind and generous, though very strict. Catherine's sister Matilda explained how Narcissa ran her house. She would point to one of us, then point to the dishes or the broom, and we would instantly get busy. Which way to California? Americans continued moving west for all the usual reasons: the desire for land, the hunger for adventure, the need to find work or escape debt. A 21-year-old teacher named John Bidwell had a slightly stranger motive. When he came home to his Missouri farm after summer vacation, some other guy was living there. The guy claimed the farm was his now, and did so while pointing a shotgun at Bidwell's chest. That's when Bidwell decided to move west. He knew about Oregon, of course, but he had also heard interesting stories of California, a vast land of mountains and grassy valleys in northern Mexico. There was only one problem. Our ignorance of the route was complete, Bidwell confessed. We knew that California lay west, and that was the extent of our knowledge. He was right about the west part. California stretched along the western coast of North America for 800 miles. Growing up in California in the early 1800s, Guadalupe Vallejo spent his childhood riding the open spaces between ranches and towns. "We traveled on as much as possible on horseback," he said. "Everyone seemed to live outdoors. We were the pioneers of the Pacific coast, building towns and missions while General Washington was carrying on the War of the Revolution." Guadalupe Vallejo. Vallejo's history was correct. The Spanish had founded San Diego, Los Angeles, and San Francisco in the late 1700s. Vallejo lived near San Francisco Bay, enjoying parties, dances, feasts, bullfights, and rodeos. He even liked the grizzly bears. The young Spanish gentlemen often rode out on moonlit nights to lasso these bears, Vallejo said, and they would drag them through the village street and past the houses of their friends. Of course, there's always another side to the story. The reason Spanish families had so much time for fun was that they had forced Native Americans to do most of the hard work of running ranches and farms. By the 1840s, California was home to about 7,000 Spanish settlers and 150,000 Native Americans, and a growing number of Americans. The American teacher John Bidwell made it to California barely surviving tornadoes and hailstorms, flooding rivers, and tortuous thirst. At one point in the desert, the only water he could find was so muddy and smelly he had to brew it into coffee before his horses would drink it. Bidwell's route to California became known as the California Trail, and as Americans started traveling this trail, they found all the dreaded dangers of the Oregon Trail with one bonus danger: the Sierra Nevada mountain range. Beware of shortcuts. The snow starts falling early in the Sierra Nevada, so it was absolutely essential for travelers to get up and over these rugged mountains by October. With this in mind, a businessman named John Hastings started selling a guide to the California Trail in 1845. In the book, he described a shortcut that would allow travelers to reach the Sierra Nevada more quickly. The so-called Hastings Cutoff really was shorter. Unfortunately for travelers, Hastings failed to mention the massive deserts and canyons and mountains along his recommended route, possibly because he had never actually seen the route. He just wanted to make it sound easy to get to California so people would come there and buy stuff from his stores. A year after Hastings' guide was published, a group of about 80 travelers led by the Donner and Reed families read the book. Hastings Cutoff is said to be a savings of 350 or 400 miles and a better route, said James Reed. He and his friends decided to give it a try. I was a child when we started to California, said James Reed's daughter Virginia, who was 12 when the trip began. Yet I remember the journey well, and I have cause to remember it. The Donner Party, as they became known, left the established trail in August, heading into the deserts west of the Great Salt Lake. With only Hastings' inaccurate maps to guide them, the group was soon lost and dangerously low on water. They lightened their wagons by tossing belongings out onto the baking sand. Their oxen started dying anyway. Growing increasingly tense and desperate, some of the men started fighting. A man named John Snyder attacked James Reed with a whip. Reed stabbed Snyder, killing him. Though Reed had acted in self-defense, the other men voted to kick Reed out of the group. He was sent off into the desert without food or weapons. When we learned of this decision, I followed him through the darkness and carried him his rifle, pistols, ammunition, and some food. I had determined to stay with him and begged him to let me stay, but he would listen to no argument, saying that it was impossible. Virginia was crying so hard she could barely walk back to camp. When she got there, she saw the fear in the eyes of her mother and younger sister and brothers. It seemed suddenly to make a woman of me, she said. I realized that I must be strong. You call this a party? The Donner Party continued west, beginning their climb into the Sierra Nevada in late October. Snow flurries were already starting. The farther we went up, the deeper the snow got, Virginia said. The wagons could not go. By early November, the whole group was stuck in snowdrifts high in the mountains. They built tiny wooden cabins and killed and ate the last of their animals. Every day the snow piled higher, 10 feet, then 20, then 25, and months of winter still lay ahead. Facing certain starvation, 15 of the strongest members of the party, 10 men and 5 women, decided to try to make it out of the mountains and send back help. They took enough food for 6 days. 9 days later, they were hopelessly lost in the snowy peaks. As the men and women huddled together around a tiny fire, someone brought up the awful question on everyone's mind. Should they kill and eat one member of the group in order to save the others? Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as the suggestion was made that were one to die, the rest might live, Virginia wrote. Then the suggestion was made that lots be cast, and whoever drew the longest slip should be the sacrifice. No one had the heart to go through with the plan, but when several group members died of cold and starvation over the next few nights, the others did the only thing they could do to survive. They cut flesh from the bodies, roasted it, and ate it. Then they packed up the extra meat, carefully labeling the pieces so no one would eat his or her own family member, and continued the journey. 7 of them, 2 of the men and all 5 of the women, made it out of the mountains alive, reaching settlements in California. As news of the Donner Party spread, volunteer rescue crews rushed into the mountains to try and save the people still stuck there. A volunteer named Daniel Rhodes found the spot where the Donner Party cabins were supposed to be. He saw no sign of the buildings. Then he realized he was standing on them. The cabins had been completely buried by snow. We saw a woman emerge from a hole in the snow, Rhodes reported. As we approached her, several others made their appearance, in like manner coming out of the snow. One of the women, barely more than a skeleton, said in a shaky voice, "Are you men from California, or do you come from heaven?" Other rescue teams soon arrived, including one led by Virginia Reed's father, James, who had found his way to California on his own. Of the 86 members of the Donner Party, 41 died before the last survivors were rescued in April 1847. Amazingly, Virginia's entire family survived. More amazingly, Virginia seemed to quickly put the winter's horrors behind her. "We are all very well pleased with California," she wrote to a cousin that spring. "It is a beautiful country. It ought to be a beautiful country to pay us for our trouble getting here." She added this advice for anyone thinking of coming to California: "Remember, never take no cut-offs and hurry along as fast as you can." Now, back to Polk. President James K. Polk wasn't thinking of going to California. He was thinking about how to make it part of the United States. Remember, Polk had run for president on the promise of expanding American territory. Last we heard, Polk was threatening to fight Great Britain over Oregon and Mexico over the rest of the West. The Oregon conflict turned out to be pretty easy to resolve. After lots of tough talk, Britain and the United States agreed to simply split the territory. In June 1846, the United States officially took over the huge chunk of land that is now the northwest region of the country. The conflict with Mexico was much more dangerous. Furious Mexican leaders had two major complaints. One, the United States had no right to annex Texas, they argued. Two, even if the United States did annex Texas, Americans were grabbing too much land. The Mexicans insisted that the Nueces River formed the southern border of Texas. Everything south of the river was not part of Texas, so it was still Mexican territory, annexation or no annexation. Polk saw it differently. He argued that the border of Texas was actually 150 miles farther south at the Rio Grande, so all that extra land came with Texas. With this border dispute raging, Polk offered to buy New Mexico and California from Mexico. It probably wasn't the right time to ask. In no mood to lose even more land to the Americans, offended Mexican leaders angrily rejected Polk's offer. Then Polk cranked the tension up another notch. In March 1846, he sent American soldiers to Texas. Under Polk's orders, the troops crossed the Nueces River and continued south into the land claimed by both the United States and Mexico. The soldiers were there to defend American territory, Polk explained. But to Mexican officials, this was an invasion of the Mexican state of Tamaulipas. General Pedro de Ampudia warned the Americans, "If you insist on remaining upon the soil of the Department of Tamaulipas, it will certainly result that arms, and arms alone, must decide the question." General Zachary Taylor, commander of the American troops, assured the Mexicans that he did insist on remaining. By April, the two armies were glaring at each other across the 100-yard wide Rio Grande. Both sides expected an explosion of violence at any moment.